Like a lot of downhill skaters, I have a bunch of different boards. However, most of the time I end up skating the same board each time, and I kind of have my go-to board. I like to think that I skate my go-to board pretty long time, usually around a year and a half to 2 years before I end up switching it out for something else. In the last 5 or 6 years, I feel like I've kind of found my niche of what I like to do when I'm skating, and I mainly skate straight, steep roads as I live in the Chicagoland suburbs, and well, there's not a lot of mountains out here. I do occasionally make it out to the mountains here and there, so I like whatever I am normally skating to be pretty capable in heavy mountains, but most of the time I am skating straight. So I like to do big stand-up slides, I like to do switch skating, I like to do spins, that kind of stuff. So the first board of the 3 boards that I'm going to talk about is the one I think I skated it probably about 5 years ago now, and that board is the Pantheon Sacrifice. I like a lot of things about the Sacrifice. Why I ended up picking the Sacrifice as a board at the time, and actually could probably stand behind these likes and dislikes of boards still to this day, is I like a freeride board that has a fairly wider wheelbase, around 25 inches. I like it also to not have a kicktail. I know a lot of times people are like, yeah, big freeride board, want to have a kicktail on that. I just feel like kicktails look a little weird when you're skating them and you have like this big thing sticking out. It's just like a little personal preference, but I just don't really like the way they look. And honestly, kicktails aren't really that functional when you're going pretty fast. There's not really that many people that are busting out flip tricks or even an ollie anywhere over 15 miles per hour. It's just really not common, and honestly it's not that useful, so I don't really see the need to have one. Now there's a couple things that I really like about this board. I really did like about this board, and I still like about this board, that honestly I keep this board around because every once in a while I think to myself that I'd like to get it back out and try it again. Now Jeff at Pantheon did an awesome job with his drop. He has this amazing crescent drop that he uses in a lot of his boards. This one I think is around like a 1/4 inch drop. It also has these nice wheel flares, so there's never really a flat spot in the drop, which is pretty amazing. It's overall like pretty symmetrical. I don't really like a completely truly symmetrical board because I just don't really like the way that they look normally, but I like how blunted and not full on pointy nosed this board is. I did eventually decide to move on from this board because I wanted to try something that was a little bit beefier, a little bit bigger, and this is actually a pretty narrow board for the kind of board that it is. Most boards around this are like, 9 1/4 to 9 1/2 inches wide, and I think at its widest point it is maybe 9 1/2, but where you'd stand is 9.25, and then actually at the bolts it's like 8.8 or 7 or something like that. So I ended up wanting to try something different. Ever since that Pantheon, I've pretty much just made my boards. It's not like I started making boards after that Pantheon, but I kind of got back into it after I changed where I lived, and I ended up kind of designing my own boards and building them myself and pressing them, which is something that's fun to do. I like to do it. It's not really a money saver like people think it's going to be, but it is fun to make your own board. So this next board, like I said, is something that I made myself, and I wanted to try the ever classic large pointy-nosed top mount. I know I just said that I don't really like the pointed nose in the past board, but I wanted to go for that classic California top mount style board. This board has no drops. It looks like it's pretty simple at first glance, and when you stand on it, it feels pretty simple. There is a decent amount of stuff going on here. There's a pretty big W hump that goes basically from this point, so it's right behind where your front foot's gonna go, and it ends right before the rear truck mount. I ended up putting a little bit of a duct tape hump back here just to help keep my foot in the exact same spot for toe sides, but besides that, it's pretty simple. The only other thing that's kind of like a hidden feature to this one is the board tapers quite a bit, and the concave also tapers. Now for most molds that you see, even though the board may not stay the same width, the concave usually just stays the same. So instead for this board, which is crazy wide actually, it's like 10.1 at its widest point, 9.5 at the back truck inner bolts, and 8.8 at the front truck inner bolts. Even though it is so tapered and varied here, the concave actually changes as it goes, especially towards the front, which I think is called a spoon nose concave. I hear people say that. I don't truly know what it means, but I think that's what a spoon nose concave is. So as it goes forward, the flat area gets smaller and smaller so that the concave actually stays the same height throughout. And it kind of gives this hugging feeling in the front, but it's very subtle, much more subtle than a full-on drop deck. There are some flush mounts here. I wanted to try out a little bit of a smaller wheelbase. I think I got all the way down to 23 and I thought it felt terrible. A lot of people are going for smaller wheelbases, but I find that when you do like a rotation, when you do like a 180, which is not what a lot of people are doing with these small boards, you know, they're not really skating switch, but when you do skate switch and you wrap the board around, the smaller the wheelbase is, the more it like snaps into gripping, right? It just kind of like snaps to that spot. It's almost like a magnetic pull. You can kind of feel when the board is really long wheelbase, it's as if it's a very weak magnet. When it snaps into place, you can't even call it a snap. It's pretty easy and gentle. Versus if you have a, you know, small kind of race inspired board, it's supposed to snap into place so that you can feel that gripping up, so that you can feel the really defined area between sliding and gripping. But having a wider wheelbase, when you're free riding and you're, you know, on the edge of falling over all the time doing stand-up slides, I find it nice to have a pretty long wheelbase so that that 180 is a much more gentle snap and doesn't throw you off. Last thing in this board, there is a very, very small kicktail. I'm not even sure if you're going to be able to see that in the camera, but the concave just barely kicks up right here at the end. Just a little something to knock the board up at the end of the run. It's pretty nice, but yeah, I mean, it's just a nice little extra feature. I really like this board. I'm actually all tempted to go back to this board right now. The main reason why I decided to make a new board is because, one, I wanted to try putting some drops into a board and standing on the drops, which I'll talk about in the next board. But also, when I was starting to skate switch, this 8.8 front was feeling really weird. There's a crazy amount of heel hang if you're not angling your front foot. So when I'm in regular stance, I'm goofy, so with my right foot forward, I have a pretty heavy angle to go with this, you know, thin front nose. But the problem is that when I would go into a switch stance, my foot goes more perpendicular to the board, and I have a crazy amount of heel hang, and it just made me low side quite a bit. Alright, so for the last board, this is the one that I'm currently skating, and honestly I barely skated it. I took it on that last mountain trip that you saw in the last video that I just made, and I've skated like one other time. Tried a lot of things with this board, made a lot of mistakes with this board, and I'm not really sure if I'm going to keep skating it or if I'm going to go back to one of the older boards. Who knows? So with my current board that I've got right here, you can see I went with carbon fiber. It's my first time ever doing carbon. I've tried fiberglass one time, didn't go super well. This carbon went better than the fiberglass did, but there's still a ton of mistakes. There's areas where there's not enough resin. There's areas where I sanded it down, like right at the wheel wells, where you can see I actually sanded through the carbon. So that's a big no-no. We even have areas like down here where there's like, oh, actually it looks like I kicktailed it off when I was skating. But there was an area here that was like, just like basically like raw carbon just like hanging out here, just the fabric itself. The construction on this board is, companies usually tell you how much of a drop there is, whether it's a 1/16 inch drop, 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch drop, right? The distance between where the truck is mounted and then where your feet are going to sit, roughly. But what they don't say is how much of a distance between the drop points are there, right? From the flattened area over here to the flattened area at the middle of the concave over here, how big of a distance that is. This is a 1.5 inch distance for a 1/4 inch drop. So this is actually a pretty mellow feeling drop. It is noticeable, but not super noticeable where it feels uncomfortable to stand on it. This creates a little bit of a feeling of like the Trap Star by Madrid where the nose kind of turns up, but it's not a full-on wedge. This looks really wedged, and it definitely ended up coming out a little bit like that, so I'm not sure what happened in the pressing process. But I have no idea why I did this now that I'm thinking about it. but there's a tiny bit of concave in the nose. I didn't need to do that, and in the tail actually. So even though it is kind of wedged a little bit on accident, it's not as wedged as it looks because there's a little bit of a concave coming up here, so it looks really drastic, but it's not that bad. Outside of that, it's pretty normal concave right here. It's actually the same concave profile as the last board. It feels totally different with the drop, so it's not really that comparable. Except there's no W in this one. I didn't think I needed it. Now you might be able to see, but I couldn't get like a crescent drop. I don't know how Jeff at Pantheon does the crescent drop. I tried to figure it out, and I really don't know how to do it. I just use a dim press method. Look it up if you don't know what it is. It's like a bunch of rib looking pieces of wood. Just look it up. Dim, D-I-M-M. Felt pretty flat here in the drops, so I just added some good old duct tape. Use the Gorilla brand duct tape. Is that a brand? There's like a gorilla on it. I'm pretty sure it's called Gorilla. It's not Gorilla Grip. Gorilla tape. It's really, really thick, so you only have to like put like 3, 4, 5 pieces before it actually builds up enough. If you use other duct tape, it's gonna take forever. So honestly, yeah, a lot of mistakes with this board. It came out like pretty decent. I mean, I'm gonna skate it for a little while. I'm pretty happy with it overall. Definitely the carbon was difficult. Also definitely difficult to get a totally flat drop, so I'll have to work on that. I've got it set up with Air K3s, which is how I've set it up with all my boards. They're like 164 mil, I think. 40, I don't know, like 6 or 7. They're on 46 plates, but I've got them wedged. It's like 46-ish, 47, I think. And then in the back, it is de-wedged a decent amount to like 38, 39, I think. I find that if you're under 10 degrees of wedging difference from the front to the back, it's not really that noticeable when you're skating switch. And it just gives you like a little more peace of mind of stability, and it helps me not over-rotate, especially on toe sides. I tend to over-rotate when I'm doing standard toes. People don't really get very sciencey with freeride setups. You can find a lot of information about race setups and setting them up. They're pretty complex. But freeride setups can be kind of complex too if you want them to be, or don't make them complex. That's fine too.